Good morning, everybody. Hope you folks are doing okay today. Last day of class, huh? Yippee! Yippee, we're dressed like a pineapple to celebrate. It's been a quick quarter. It's been a quick summer session, but hopefully you guys have learned something and at least have found a way to distract yourself by thinking about perceptual skills that you didn't know you had. Hopefully you'll have things to do for the rest of the summer before the fall, and then find other ways to kind of keep yourself busy. Hopefully we'll all be out of this soon, and I'll see you on campus in the spring, walking around, and stop by and introduce yourself, say hi, and remind me that you were in my course, and we'll chat. I hope I get a chance to meet all of you in person then. Keep our fingers crossed for the spring. Anyway, what I'm going to do first, of course, is tell you a little bit about the exam, and then we'll get through the rest of the material for today. We have to go a little quickly because there's a bunch of stuff I want to cover, really fun stuff, but it might be a little bit faster than normal. Of course, you'll have the recording, so it shouldn't be a problem. Okay, let's go through the exam stuff first. Actually, let me... Oops, let me set this background up so you don't have to look at the ugly green. Oh, that's pretty. Okay, let's talk about the exam. I'll see if there's any questions then. Okay, hopefully you enjoyed the review session that Serena did for you yesterday. She said that she had fun at least. Gave you some ideas what the questions would be like and how much you would need to study different topics. But the test is very straightforward. It'll be very much like your midterm, just covering the second half of the material. That will include all the lecture material since the midterm, of course, all discussion section material since then as well. And actually that includes touch and like the rubber hand illusion and Helen Keller, which I think was actually held before the midterm, but we made it very clear. Everything from touch on, whether it was in the lecture and the discussion section of the book, all that stuff will be on the final. Those sections also included facial attractiveness and multisensory attractiveness, which I believe you went through Monday, along with synesthesia. And then the book material just covers that, or just tracks that completely. So everything from chapter 6. I probably won't have very much time to cover the last chapter on multisensory perception. So I won't have much of a chance to cover that in lecture. So I suggest you read through that also. There are slides available from previous years that will help with that. I'm not going to ask a lot of questions from that chapter, but please do read through that chapter. You will be responsible for some questions on that. Okay, and also read through the epilogue, please. I think there's also a question based on the epilogue from the book that I won't cover in lecture. It is an open book exam, as you know, but you do have to do it alone. I don't want anyone collaborating with other folks in the class. So it's, you're on your honor system here. Remember, for an open book exam, of course, you have to study. The idea is you go through the test once with all the knowledge that you've gained through studying. And then if you have questions on any of the particular items on the test, then you can use your notes to kind of clarify that. And you should have enough time to look up the answers to hopefully the few questions that you are unsure of on the exam. I will post it at midnight tonight, and you'll be able to take it through midnight on Sunday, and then on Monday I'll have to do the grading, and the grades have to be posted to the university on Tuesday, so certainly by Tuesday you'll be able to find out your grade. Okay, let me take a quick second here to see if there's any questions on the exam. If anyone has any questions about what's going to be covered, or what the nature of the questions are going to be, what the format of the exam is. Hopefully it's very straightforward. You all did so well on the midterm. I'm really not concerned, but let's see if there's any questions. Hold on just a second here. Okay. How many questions on the exam? Chase asked. Good question. It's exactly like the last one, so you'll have 80 minutes to do 60 questions. So it's the same sort of format. 60 questions, 80 minutes. Obviously, you'll have to, as I said, you can't look up the answers to all your questions. It's time to be like that. I don't want you to have to rely on your notes for every question. There'd be no way you'd be able to do that. You need to study, and then you'll have the extra time to look up answers to any of the questions that you are unsure of. Okay, thank you for asking that, Chase. Are there other questions on the exam, on the material, anything like that at this point? Okay, then we will continue with our discussion of imitation. If questions come up, go ahead and type them in. Even if I don't respond to them immediately, I will be, when we take our breaks, I will have a chance to look at them then. All right. So let's continue with our discussion then. Great. Oops, hold on a second. So just to go back to where we were, remember what we were discussing about imitation. Let's get the big picture here very quickly. That a lot of more recent research, meaning over the last 10, 15 years, suggests that we are consummate imitators, that we are imitating each other all the time in a subtle way, and not, completely imitating. We're kind of moving towards each other's behaviors as we interact. But that has a function. That imitation has a function. One of the functions we talked about is that it makes us a better person. And this is just a slide you saw last class. It facilitates our social interactions. It makes us kind of think that the interaction has been going more smoothly. It rates the interaction as more we rate the interaction as more successful if we're imitated. We report liking the person better if we're imitated. Again, so the contrast with your siblings imitating you to make you annoyed is very clear here. This is imitation that happens much more subtly and with some delay, so you are not really consciously aware of being imitated whatsoever. That's an important component of this. Otherwise, if you are aware of being imitated, you do find it annoying. But this subtle imitation does seem to facilitate social interactions. And we talked about some of the other contexts of this. It helps facilitate agreement when people are kind of discussing things. Again, it's not so strong that it will make you completely change your political party or something like that. But if you're working on some sort of more neutral ethical issue, or working on a problem together that that has to be solved in a group or in pairs, you will more likely agree if the person you're interacting with does this subtle imitation of you. And we talked about its implications for waitressing and things like sales, product enjoyment, that sort of thing. Again, the emphasis is here that it needs to be subtle, smooth, and delayed. It can't really be conspicuous whatsoever for these sorts of, benefits to occur. Lastly, we discussed this really interesting set of findings where being imitated doesn't make you just like the person who's imitating you better, but the act of being imitated in this way actually causes you to generalize your good feelings towards other people and ideas and that sort of thing. And we talked about this really cute experiment where after you've been imitated, somebody comes in, drops pencils. You are more likely to be willing to pick them up, to help out that person, or contribute money to a good cause if you had been imitated just previously before you were given that choice. So there's kind of a way that altruism, subtle altruism, is actually facilitated by being imitated. So yeah, we can say in that sense that in a small way, being imitated actually makes you a better person. So imitation, this kind of function that we're uncovering now, has that purpose to some degree. It seems to help with social situations. Sorry, allergies. Anyway, I also wanted to talk about something else about it. And I think this is even more fundamental than how it facilitates your social interactions. It facilitates something very basic. it facilitates you to be a better perceiver. And we're talking about not just social perceiver necessarily, we're talking about perception on a very fundamental level here. Like watching somebody perform an action. If you are going through some sort of kind of subtle imitative sort of behavior on your own as you're watching somebody, that imitative behavior allows you to see things about that person's behavior you might not have noticed otherwise. I think we have some intuitions about this when we were learning a sport for the first time when you're a kid, maybe learning a musical instrument. Let's give the scenario of my son learning tennis. That when he decided he really enjoyed tennis, I guess he was probably in middle school. He started playing. He started taking lessons at school, and then he started watching tennis matches on TV. And I remember him, seeing things about the tennis performances of the players. Nadal, those great tennis players that I would not have seen, that I didn't see unless he pointed them out. Certain ways that the players were swinging, their stance, all that sort of stuff. And clearly what was going on here was he was using his own kind of motor training, the motor training he was getting at his tennis lessons, to kind of fine-tune his perceptual ability to see things that he hadn't seen before. And that's kind of a very kind of, a clear example of this. You're learning a musical instrument. You're learning to play guitar, for example, and you're learning scales. You're learning how to use the fingerboard, that sort of thing. When you then watch a guitarist perform, and they're performing a solo or something like that, you will see techniques that they're using better now than you had before because you've motorically learned those techniques. So I'm just making this kind of very intuitive for us, but the idea here is that having some motor experience helps us perceive things more precisely. It helps us see things that weren't seen before. It kind of facilitates us becoming more like perceptual experts in that sport or in that that instrument. Musical instrument as an example. So the idea here is that motor training can enhance perceptual skill. And that's kind of anecdotal evidence for that, the idea that our kind of sports skill, our motoric sports skill, our motoric musical instrument skill can enhance what we can see. But there's some really kind of fun laboratory demonstrations of this too, and I'm just going to talk about one. It's a little complicated, but I think you'll get the main idea here. This is a situation in which you would be in a laboratory. You'd sit down and in a chair, and there'd be an experimenter there, and they said, "What I'm going to teach you to do now over the next hour is to learn a little dance." Okay, sounds ridiculous, but it's a little arm dance. You're not going to have to get up from your chair. You're just going to sit in the chair, and I'm gonna do the dance for you, the arm dance for you, and then your job is to kind of imitate it. So they do it first, and it looks something like this. You like that dance? Actually, it's going to be something. Let me get a little more precise like this. It's like this. Yeah. Okay. And what I'm trying to do here in my arm dance, not bad, huh? Is show you that it's not a dance like this where my arms are going in exactly opposite directions, nor is it a dance like this where my arms are going in the same direction. They're kind of somewhere in between. So when this arm's forward, this arm's coming forward, and when this arm's back, this arm's coming back already. So it's not, kind of what we say is anti-phase like this. It's a little bit more somewhere in between. You understand? So this arm's forward, and this one's always coming forward. This one's back, and then this one's coming back like that. So it's something like this, okay? And you do it. You say, okay, now you do it, and you try it, and they'll correct you if you're not doing it like they're doing it. And then they say, okay, I think you got it. Go ahead and do it on your own now for the next 45 minutes. Doesn't that sound fun? So you're here, I'm going to get this as precise as possible. If you have any trouble, they're going to say, well, let's try again, watch me. But for the most part, it's motoric practice. That this odd kind of arm coordination is going to be something you're learning through your own motor training. Okay, And then they say, okay, great, thank you for learning that silly arm dance. Now what we'd like you to do is something completely different. We're going to ask you to watch some videos of people walking. And your job is going to be to say that that 2 videos in a row are either the same exact clip. You see a person walking, and then you see another person walk. Or you see another clip of a person walking, and your job is to say whether they're the same or different. Okay, that sounds really easy, but the clips are difficult. The clips look like this. Actually, there's an odd arm walking facilitates point light walking, but let me show you what the clips look like. Oh my gosh, this is so frustrating. Just this morning, I got this video to work. I don't know what happens. Oh, wait. There it goes, it is working. It says it wasn't going to work, but it's working. It looks something like this. This isn't exactly how it looks, but it would be something like this. So all you see are points on an actor. And in this case, it's just a demonstration of how these stimuli are created more than anything else. Is this going to show again? Basically, these are called point light actors. And the way they're created is that's like the little points of light are applied to the joints of the body, the shoulder, the elbow, and the wrist, and I think also the hip and the knee and the ankle. And this one happens to show 2 people, and they're just kind of standing there. But in the videos you'd see in this experiment, it would be this point light person walking across the screen. Okay, so you're just seeing these points walk across the screen. So all of a sudden it gets harder, right? You're not seeing a full image of a person. You're seeing this person rendered in this kind of point light sort of image. But more than that, the images, the walker, as they're walking by, aren't really walking very normally. If anything, it kind of looks like they're drunk. So now imagine seeing these point light images walking by, but rather than kind of walking normally, they're kind of going like this. They kind of look drunk, and their legs aren't quite coordinated with each other, and the arms aren't quite coordinated with each other. Now you get a sense of how difficult this is. So you see one of those, a drunk point light walker, and then you see another drunk point light walker, and your job is to say whether they were the same video clip or were they different. It's hard. And you're not very good at it. Imagine all these kind of degradations of the image. It's no longer an image like a photographic image of a walker. It's points, and the person isn't even really walking in a normal way. They're walking as if they're drunk, and you would not be good at it, except for one of the coordination states. So these point light walkers are actually computer generated. It's easy to animate these sort of things. And they're animated so the limbs, they're not actually drunk. They're not actually made to look drunk. What they're made to do is to have limb coordinations of different kind of phases. So remember we said this would be anti-phase, out of phase. This would be in phase. And then there's other phases you could do as well, like this. And you would only be good at determining whether it's a same image, same video, or a different video when it came to seeing the coordination phase you had just spent 45 minutes practicing. Okay, so say it's, I don't know, what is this? Maybe not 180 degrees out of phase. Maybe it's I don't know, let's say 110 degrees out of phase or something like that. If that's the one you learned, that's then the one that you would be best at perceiving in this image. And so why are we doing it such a crazy way? Well, the idea here is what you want to do is you want to make sure that when somebody's improving their perception, you're doing it in a way that they're faced with stimuli they've never seen before. So you use these kind of crazy drunken point light stimuli, and you try to facilitate their ability to do that with their own coordination. So that really works well. And it suggests that, training, the perceptual benefits you get from motor training are very specific in some ways, aren't they? It's not like this training made you overall a better perceiver of these drunken point light walkers. It only made you a better perceiver when the Point Light Walker was walking with the same exact coordination that you had just learned. Okay, so your motor training benefits something very specific when it comes to your perceptual skill. Cool, huh? Okay, let me talk about other examples of how scientists have shown that your perceptual skill can benefit from kind of the motor system's involvement. And I think these are very straightforward, actually. These are easier to understand than this last crazy experiment. If you restrict like a subtle motor involvement when somebody is perceiving something. Now we're not teaching somebody to be better at something motorically. We're restricting their motor imitation. It does influence how well they can perceive. And I think most straightforward example of this is with faces. So, okay, there's a face, and what that face is showing you is something we discussed before, ways of actually restricting facial imitation. As you know from our face discussion, when we look at smiling faces, when we look at frowning faces, we can't help but kind of subtly imitate those expressions ourselves. Again, it's a very subtle sort of imitation. You might not be able to see it with the naked eye, but you could record it with kind of muscle activity measurements. Well, if instead what you do is you restrict somebody's ability to do this subtle imitation, you kind of occupy the smile muscles as somebody's watching a smile, their ability to recognize facial expressions is diminished a little bit. So what I'm showing here is this person, say, is now asked to rate whether somebody's frowning or has a neutral face, okay? They would have trouble doing that a little bit if, in fact, they held a pen in their teeth, so they couldn't do the imitative frown that they would normally be allowed to do. So I'm looking at a frowny face, and I subtly move my mouth down like a little frown. If I'm prevented from doing that by having to hold a pen in my teeth, kind of puts me in a smile sort of expression. Okay, all right. What that's going to do is it's going to prevent me from doing that subtle imitation, and then that's going to affect my ability to perceive frowns as well as I could. Now, it's a subtle effect. I'm going to be able to, if you show me a frown, you show me a smile, I'm going to say one's a frown, one's a smile. But if it's a little ambiguous, I will be inhibited in my ability to recognize frowns if I'm doing this. Same thing with smiles. If I'm asked to, look at a subtly smiling face versus a neutral face, so very, very little difference here, not like that, very, very subtle difference. I might have more trouble doing that if my smile muscles are not allowed to imitate that smile I'm seeing. So now I'm doing that, so I'm inhibiting what the smile muscles can do. It affects my ability to accurately recognize subtle smiles. Blinded by Botox. I know, I put that up there, and you must have thought, oh boy, what the heck does that have to do with anything? I don't know if any of you have had Botox. I get it every morning. No, I'm kidding. I would look much better if I did. But I live in Los Angeles, and I'm in middle age, so yes, I do have some female friends who have Botox. And it works great for them. They love it. They feel like they look younger. And what the idea is, Botox will kind of temporarily inactivate a muscle. Some of the muscles of the face, just a little bit. And what that does potentially is it allows the wrinkles that would normally appear to kind of become more subtle, and it makes people look younger. In theory, my friend looks great, it makes her happy, more power to her. I'm not going to be judgy on this. However, this is a really interesting sort of thing. It does have an effect over her facial expressions a tiny bit. I probably wouldn't have noticed if she hadn't said anything. But interestingly, it also affects how she would perceive other people's facial expressions. So essentially, what the Botox is doing is inhibiting kind of imitative muscle movements, like it would be kind of analogous, more subtle, but analogous to her holding a pen in her teeth when she's looking at frowns, or holding a pen in her lips when she's looking at smiles. And again, it's a very subtle sort of effect. Okay, I mean, when my wife and I go out with her and her husband, we have a great time. They certainly, we have no problem recognizing each other's expressions or anything like that. But if she was put in an experiment where she would be kind of shown very subtle smiles or very subtle frowns that might look neutral in a lot of ways, you kind of have to look carefully or that sort of thing, she would have more difficulty now that she's been taking Botox than before she was taking Botox. Which is really interesting because, I think it all makes sense to us that her own facial expressions would be affected by Botox. But the fact that her perception of other people's expressions are affected by Botox suggests that her, like everybody else, involves our own kind of smile muscles to help us perceive other people's expressions. Right? So again, evidence that imitation allows us to be better perceivers if the muscles that help us imitate the subtle expressions of another face are broken, or if they're numbed for a period of time, we become less good perceivers, which is really interesting. So facial expressions are a great example of this. There's others that you can read about in the book, but this is just something very, very straightforward. This is an experiment where people are shown images. That's clever the way they did this, I think. These are some images from the experiment. And in this case, what people are asked to do is to look at two images fairly quickly. I think they're given about 2 seconds to do it, and to say whether or not this person is in the same sort of configuration with their limbs, same posture, even though one of the images is taken from the side, one of the images is taken from the front. Is this person, are her limbs in the same posture? And you have to make that decision within 2 seconds, say. And it's challenging, but you can do it. You do fairly well. Unless you're asked to do something with your own limbs as you're making these judgments. So say at first, you're sitting in a chair and you're shown these images, and with your right hand, you have to say whether they're the same or different. So you have to kind of do a little mental rotation to determine that. And I would say for this, they would be the same. It looks like that they're the same in this particular case. However, if I were swinging my left arm as I was performing this task, as these images were coming up and I was judging them, I would be less accurate than if I were just stationary. And this is really interesting. What I would be less accurate with specifically was being able to determine whether the arm postures were in the same or different positions across the two images. So these images can be the same, or they can be different in either, the arm postures or the leg postures here. And that's something that can be manipulated, in these images very easily. When they were taken, people either, had different arm positions or the same arm positions, or different leg positions, the same leg positions. My movement of my arm affects my ability to make judgments of the posture of somebody else's arm. It's a subtle effect, but it is an effect, and it only affects my ability to recognize arm postures. If, on the other hand, I were looking at these images again, and I wasn't moving my arms. Okay, I was just making the judgments here. My arm is still, but I was moving my leg. You can't see this right now, but I'm swinging my leg. I was like on a stool or something like that, so my legs were free to swing, and one of them was swinging. You're able to kind of anticipate what I'm going to say here, I'm sure. I would not be as good as if my leg was stationary, and it would just affect my ability to recognize leg postures. So the fact that I'm occupying my leg suggests that I'm kind of doing something else with the motoric system that allows me to better perceive what somebody else is doing. And it is, again, specific to the body part I'm using. So what all this is saying is that your motor system influences how you perceive when you're looking at somebody else. And it does so in a body-specific way. So when I'm swinging my leg, I'm fine at determining whether or not arm positions are the same. I'm inhibited when it comes to leg positions. If I'm swinging my arm, I have trouble determining whether the arm positions are the same, but I have no trouble with the legs. It's a body-specific sort of inhibition. So we use our own body and its muscles to help us be better perceiver. Okay. All right, so let's now get a little bit more technical with this and talk about more precisely what's being affected, how this works. And what we're going to do is use one of our favorite techniques, the transcranial magnetic stimulation technique. Remember we talked about this? So what you do is you take this TMS system and you're very briefly and more subtly lesioning the brain. I know it sounds icky, it sounds scary, but it works wonderfully. It's very temporary. And as I said, there's some really great things that TMS can do. And so it's like you're putting this, these little mouse ear things. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to move it to the motor system. So that's actually on the side of the head. Remember, we've talked about the strip on the side of the head that's involved with touch. The motor system one is just right next to that. And we can get pretty precise as to what part of that motor strip of the brain we can actually target. And then we give that system, that part of the brain, a blast of TMS, and it is going to have effects. What is clearly going to have an effect on is our ability to then, make motor responses. So if you, for example, take the TMS device, put it on the side of the head, and target it to the part of my motor area up here that controls my arm, I might, in fact, have a little arm spasm or something like that. Or I might have trouble moving my arm in a very precise way. It's going to affect my motor coordination to some degree. But for what we're talking about here, it's not only going to affect my motor coordination, it's going to affect my perceptual ability in a way that's relevant to the body part that's being kind of lesioned temporarily. So, well, let's do this. Let's take our little mouse ears, and now what we're going to do is we're going to affect the part of the motor brain, the motor strip here that controls my face. Okay. I know it sounds icky, but trust me, these are. I've been through this. It's not bad at all. It feels a little weird, but hey, for science, why not? They kind of give it a little charge here. Bzz, you hear a little noise, and you might feel your face actually. Maybe cringe a little bit. You might feel a little bit something going in your face. You might be asked at that point to try to make a subtle smile, and it might be more difficult because it is affecting your motor brain. But the other part of it's really interesting. Then you're shown faces with different expressions, different emotions on them. And you find that you're less able to accurately perceive the expression in the seen face. So inhibiting a part of the motor brain, the motor area of the brain, affects the corresponding kind of perception of that body part. Okay, so you are going to kind of very briefly break that face area of the motor brain, and not only is my face going to be a little affected in how I can coordinate my own face, it's going to affect how I perceive other people's faces. Kind of in the same way we talked about before with regard to the Botox situation. I'm going to be able to tell a big smile from a big frown, but the subtle ones are going to be more tricky for me. And then you can now, let's do another little experiment with this. Now what we do is we take the TMS and move it to the part of the motor brain where the arm is, okay, where the arm is represented. And as I said, you might then find your own arm twitch a little bit, or if you're then asked to do something with your arm, you say, "Oh, I'm having a little trouble coordinating my arm as I usually do." It's not going to be terrible. But then you're shown little videos of an arm. It's isolated, you just see a video of an arm lifting different amounts of weight, okay? And you're asked to judge, the relative amount. You see two videos in a row and you say, which is more weight, the first one or the second one? And they cover up, the actual weight itself. So you're watching the arm, and typically you'd be able to tell which one was heavier. I mean, we're actually pretty good at that task, but not while we're being lesioned by the TMS. I shouldn't use that word, it sounds terrible. It's not like somebody's sticking a sword in your head or something, but you're just kind of temporarily inhibiting the normal processing of that part of the brain. So it will affect your ability to judge the weight that's been lifted as you see an arm moving in a video. It does have an inhibitory effect on your perceptual skills in doing that type of thing. And as you go through all these experiments, what you find is that people have their ability to recognize these movements is pretty dependent on where you're lesioning here. If you go towards the leg part of that brain area, people have trouble, making judgments of kind of specific leg sort of motions, and on and on. What you don't have problem with, it's not going to do is it's not going to affect your ability to say, I'm seeing a hand, or I'm seeing a leg, or I'm seeing a wrist, or I'm seeing a face, or anything like that. It's very specific to affecting your perceptual ability of the actions that are occurring. Okay, whether it's a heavyweight or a lightweight, whether it's a neutral face or a subtly smiling face. Okay, it's the actions. An emotional response is like an action on the face, just like weightlifting is in that case. Okay, so it's interesting. You're seeing now there's something going on in the brain that seems to make use of the motor system to help us perceive better. What about this idea of the actual muscles being active as we're perceiving? So I want to be careful here because I've been talking about faces a lot. And faces are an example where the actual muscles of your own face are affected as you're looking at an expressing face. Okay, so you can actually measure the muscle activity here while you're looking at a face. Okay. We'll call that sometimes a covert imitation because, it's a very kind of subtle thing. The muscles are activated, but you might not see the kind of imitative expression. That's fine. It's very subtle. But you do see the muscles involved as somebody's watching somebody else, performing something like a smile or a frown. Is that the case with the rest of our body? Okay. In other words, when I watch somebody lifting weight, am I actually activating the muscles here? Okay, if we took the sensors and put them on the muscles of the arm rather than the face, would you see kind of this subtle imitative response? And the answer for the most part is no, not really. It seems that it's most prevalent in facial sort of subtle imitation. However, that being said, you do see, and this is kind of a clue to understanding how the brain's involved in this imitation, okay? There are ways of kind of activating muscles without you trying to, using TMS. So, we've been using TMS. This is cool. We've been using TMS to break your brain. There are ways of using TMS to excite your brain, to make it almost more sensitive. And these are the sort of ways TMS is used to help treat depression and tinnitus, the ringing in the ears. It's just a little aside. But we can use TMS to kind of excite various areas of the brain. It's a different type of thing. When I want to break a brain area, temporarily, what I'll do is I'll take the TMS device and make it a pretty strong, long pulse, like that. All of a sudden, it temporarily breaks the part of your brain that controls your facial muscles, right? However, I can use TMS in another way. This is so cool. That's why you want to buy a TMS device as soon as you can. You can put it near that top part of the brain, and instead of going big, strong, long pulse, you go like that. That's actually the sound it makes. And what you're doing there is you're applying weaker pulses that are short, okay? And what that's going to do is not break the brain, it's going to actually excite that brain area. And if you do that over the motor area of the brain, this motor cortex area, what you start to see is then imitative muscle activity. Okay, so watch this. I'm watching a video of somebody lifting a weight, and I just kind of sit there and say, oh, this is the most boring video I've ever seen. Okay, and you're recording muscle activity from here. Nothing happens with the muscle activity. There's no recordable muscle activity as I'm watching somebody else lift weights. And so unlike faces, right? Faces will show that muscle activity, but not for anything else besides faces. Okay. But then what you do is you bring your TMS mouse ears over to the brain, and you use this kind of excitability component, excitability mode of TMS. And what you find is while I'm watching muscles being used to lift weight in that video, then my own muscles will start to become active. Okay, it's not like my arm's going to start moving or anything like that, but the arm muscles will show these kind of subtle imitative sorts of responses that facial muscles do. It just kind of needs some priming. It needs some kind of extra excitation. And this is critical now. If I then watch somebody moving their leg, these muscles will not be active even if I'm being primed. Okay, so what the priming does is a kind of, that kind of excitability, that increase in excitability does, is it kind of sets the muscles up to do an imitative response with what I'm seeing now. Okay, my muscle activity will only be something that can be observed, measurable, if I'm watching arm movements, not when I'm watching leg movements, if in fact I'm being TMS'd. So it primes the muscles for covert imitation. And, again, watching hand or arm motions will induce activity in hand or arm motions only. All right. So, depending, actually, I think they did, rather than testing arms and legs here, they did something, they had people watching arm movements versus just hand movements, and they were priming TMS, they were exciting the brain with these short pulses, and what they found was when watching a hand move, the hand muscles started to kind of get involved, but not the arm muscles. When watching an arm move, the arm muscles started to twitch, started to show activity, not the hand muscles. Okay, so what the TMS serves to do is kind of prime the kind of covert imitation that you see with faces, but now you're able to record it now from other muscles in the body. Okay. One other thing I wanted to mention, and we'll take a little break, is about speech. Okay. When you listen to speech, you don't actually involve your own speech muscles unless you're being primed by the TMS. So you're getting these little kind of short pulses with TMS. When you're listening to speech, your own muscles start to show activity. And the muscles that show activity are dependent on the speech you're hearing. So for example, here I am, I'm listening to someone say ba, ba, ba. Nothing will happen if I'm not being primed, but once I'm primed with the short pulse TMS, you'll see little activity in my lip muscles. If, on the other hand, I'm listening to da, 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 once I'm primed, I won't show activity in my lip muscles. I will show activity in my tongue muscles. So it serves the same sort of function here. That priming of the motor brain then allows kind of the muscles to show their sort of imitative sort of involvement, right? And that's just very quickly, that's not just true if I'm listening to speech, it's also true if I'm actually seeing a face silently articulate, which is going to be important in our discussion in just a few minutes. If I'm seeing somebody silently articulating, my own lip muscles will be involved. If instead I see them silently articulating, my lip muscles won't be involved, my tongue muscles will be involved. Again, though, only if I'm being pulsed with TMS. So what it suggests is that even if you aren't able to see these kind of muscle kind of imitations that are occurring with faces all the time, there's something imitating in my brain all the time that can then be shown to make it to muscles with this little TMS priming. So even if the muscles aren't always imitating, it seems that the motor parts of your brain are imitating. which is really interesting. We'll talk about more detail of that in just a second, but let's take a quick break and see if there's questions, and then do a practice exam question. Okay, are there any questions first? Any questions about what we've been through today so far? No? Okay, then let's just do a polling question. Let's see. What do we got here? Yeah, okay, I don't think I asked this last class. Yeah, okay. So here's the question. Being subtly imitated in a smooth, delayed manner would likely A, make you angry, B, make you like the imitator more, C, make you like the item the imitator is trying to sell you a little more, or D, both B and C. Okay, take a half minute or so and give us your best answer to that one, and then we'll talk about it. Uh-oh. There you go. Okay. Okay, we can put this here. I'm going to do a magic trick later if you're wondering. Oh, I didn't realize that was viewable on the screen. That's fine. We'll see that in just a second anyway. Okay, I think we got it. That's pretty much everybody. Yeah, that's good enough. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. It won't make you angry because they're not doing what your siblings used to do. They are doing it smoothly, they're doing it delayed, and they are doing it subtly. So it should not make you should not even recognize it. You should not know you're being imitated consciously, at least. It does make you like the imitator more. If the imitator is selling you something, it is actually something that you will find more appealing by being imitated. So the correct answer is B and C. Yet again, I guess you're just going to write D for every answer on the exam. I got to be careful. I got to change that for the next time I teach this course. All right. I will take a picture of that if you haven't yet, and let's stop sharing. All right. Give you a chance to ask any other questions at this point. Any questions? All right. Okay. Cool. Let's go back to screen sharing and go into probably one of the more complicated slides. I don't think it's that tough, but it's one of the concepts that I really wanted you to learn this quarter. Has to do with what we think is going on with your brain when it's imitating. So let me talk a little bit about the history of this idea. So now we're talking about, we're not talking about kind of this kind of imitation that's going on that, kind of you can measure in people's body language or in their speech production or something like that, but rather the imitation that goes on at a more subtle level, even more subtle than seeing kind of the muscle kind of twitches or the muscle activity. We're talking about imitation that goes on in your brain. And this was a really kind of revolutionary discovery, and it was one of these great examples of kind of a serendipity in the laboratory. Let me see what's on the slide next before I tell you the story, just very quickly. Yeah, what was going on? This is a great story. In Italy, they were testing monkeys, and they were looking to trying to understand the types of cells that were involved in initiating actions, action planning cells, sometimes they're called. It was just cells that were involved in kind of the first cells you would see active when the monkey was reaching for something, and they would train the monkey to reach for something, or they'd give him something in front of him that he would enjoy reaching for, that he would normally reach for. And as it turns out, monkeys love raisins. So if you ever get a pet monkey, they love raisins. There you go. So here's what happened. They were, they were training the monkey to get the raisins, and he was having a great time. And it's, it's completely painless for the monkey once the implants are there, and monkeys are fine. He's eating the raisins, everything's going fine. And then they gave the monkey a little rest, and they kept the electrodes kind of plugged into the cells that, again, were considered to be involved in initiating the action. They were finding, these activities right here. So you see that these are just showing the activity of the cells. And then what happened was, as the monkey was kind of just resting there, kind of hanging out like that, I guess one of the grad students was hungry, him or herself. And I guess you got to be really hungry to want to eat monkey raisins, but that's exactly what this person did. They reached for the raisins themselves to, have a little snack themselves. They, why does Bobo get all the raisins? I'm hungry too. I want some raisins as well. So they reached for Bobo's raisins and started eating them. And what happened was, Bobo didn't get upset. Bobo's a generous monkey, but the cells that were involved in initiating his actions to reach for the raisins himself started showing activity when he was watching somebody else reaching for the raisin. And that's what's shown right here. Okay, so here's the activity when Bobo reaches, and here's the activity when the grad student reaches. It's not quite as much, but the fact that there's any activity at all kind of flipped everybody in the lab out, because it was thought that we have cells for action and cells for perception, separate groups of cells. Okay, and one part of those cells for action for motor behavior are the cells that are involved in initiating the action, but they have nothing to do with perception, right? Those cells are over here. But as it turns out, these cells do have something to do with perception, and it was kind of this serendipitous discovery. These action planning cells are involved in seeing the same movements that they actually initiate, seeing somebody else perform the movements that they're involved in initiating. And that was kind of weird. They always thought that these cell groups were completely different. But here is a group of cells that have double duty. They have double responsibility. They initiate an action, and they perceive another animal performing the same action. So what the scientists thought they had here was a new group of cells that they had never really understood before. And they named them mirror neurons for the obvious reason that they, like when you initiate an action in front of a mirror, you also see yourself creating that same action. It's a kind of a cute name, mirror neurons. But in this case, the mirror neurons were involved when initiating the animal's own action and then seeing somebody else perform the action as well. Okay, that's kind of revolutionary. So what about people? Well, these experiments with the monkeys were done with single cell recordings where you can record from individual cells. It's much more difficult to do that with people. So what's been done with people is they do scanning, and they see if there are kind of small areas of the brain that are like mirror neurons, where they are involved in kind of creating action and perceiving somebody else performing the same action. So they put people in scanners, and they do the same type of thing that they did with the monkeys. They say, okay, first grab towards this target, okay, and they watch what part of the brain lights up, and then they say, okay, now just sit here and watch somebody grabbing to the target, and they see if those same cells light up. And so what that's called is no longer, we don't talk about with humans, we don't talk about mirror neurons specifically, we talk about them as mirror neuron systems, because just for the technical reason that it's hard to record from individual cells in the human brain. Okay, so we talk about mirror neuron systems as being the analogous motor area. So it is part of the motor area, but it does seem to have this ability to detect somebody else performing the task, okay? And what you find in humans is it, in fact, is responsive to seeing hand and face actions, right? So, you ask somebody first to make a broad smile, like that, and you see what part of the brain was activated as they initiated that type of action, okay? A little part right here, say. And then you have them watch people on video make a broad smile, and you see that same little section of the motor brain activated when they're watching somebody. Same thing with hand motions and leg motions and all that sort of thing. What it's thought is that that is the area. Those are the cells that are involving the motor system for purposes of better perception. Okay, so remember the big picture here. We were finding that imitation is rampant. We do it all the time. We can't help it. And it even happens when, it's not really measurable on the outside of the body. It's happening deep in the brain. And it was known then that it seems that it helps perception. Well, right, so helps perception, helps people see faces, more subtly, helps people be more accurate in learning a new skill, that sort of thing. Now we have an idea of what part of the brain might be involved in that. This is, in fact, the part of the brain, it's thought, that is part of the motor system that helps out actually the perception system. Okay? We know this because our friend TMS, right? Now what we're going to do is use the old style TMS where we break a part of the brain just for a very short time period. And if you first identify the mirror neuron systems in the motor brain that seem to be activated with an action and watching an action, if you then target the strong TMS pulse to that part of the brain, they then have trouble perceiving. Okay? It's a motor part of the brain, but it's affecting their perception. So now basically what we're doing is we're pinning down where in the brain this kind of imitative kind of help with perception happens. Not surprisingly, I should have probably added to this little image right here. This is the activity when an action is performed. This is the activity when an action is perceived. If in fact, the monkey or the person is asked to perform the action while they're perceiving the action, that's when you see the very most activity in these regions. So I guess it would somehow be even higher than all this little, neural energy here. Okay, so these systems are most active during imitation, and it's thought generally that these motor neuron systems are the part of the motor regions of the brain that are actually used to fine-tune our perception. So this imitating that we do, that we've seen in so many different contexts, all kind of unconscious, it facilitates our social skills, it facilitates our perception, and here's the way in which it facilitates perception. There's a region of the motor brain that acts to help our seeing and hearing and touching by being active as we're watching somebody else perform a task. Okay? Cool. Let's. Hopefully you got that general concept. I know that Serena told me she asked you a question about it yesterday, and you couldn't answer, which makes perfect sense. But now hopefully you could answer that question. Let's just talk a tiny bit more about these things to kind of discuss the kind of implications of what this research has kind of shown us since then. And one of the questions that we always get and I'm sure you've thought about this, is one of the kind of most reflexive imitations we do is yawning. Okay, and I think that's a great example. I think that's absolutely a good example. And I think there is evidence that our mirror neuron systems are involved when we see somebody yawn or when we yawn ourselves. So, yawning is contagious to some degree. The reason I have familiarity on there is I'll tell you in just a second, but it is known that there's a region of the brain that is active when you yourself yawn, and that same region is active when you see somebody else yawn. So activating that same system, either way, seeing somebody yawn or yawning yourself might be part of the reason we have this kind of contagious yawning sort of phenomenon. It turns out that it's not so reflexive that it happens whenever we see somebody yawn, right? Hold on. Did you yawn? No. All right. Maybe it doesn't work virtually. It doesn't work over the internet, right? But another way that it's actually modulated is by how much familiarity we have with somebody. If we are very familiar with that person, if we know that person well, we are more likely to contagiously yawn ourselves than if we just met the person. So it's not like completely hardwired where you automatically reflexively yawn whenever you see somebody. Things play a role in there, like familiarity, probably the social situation, that sort of thing. But yeah, I think it's a great example. What else? What might this kind of ultimately be used for? What might be the evolutionary purpose? And I think part of it is that it does fine-tune our perception. I think these systems are particularly important when you are learning a new skill, or when you're an infant and you're learning your first language. You're learning to, play a game, a sport, you're learning to catch a ball, that sort of stuff. I think that our mirror systems are going to help out kids like crazy in that case. And as we continue to learn through our lifetime, I think it really helps in that sort of thing. So that's very true. But it's also considered to be maybe something that's giving us more insight into other people's intentions. Remember, we talked about the importance of perceiving another person's intentions towards you when we were discussing expressions, right? So what's the purpose of being able to recognize people's facial expressions so efficiently, okay, so consistently? It really kind of gives us information about what the other person is kind of intending towards you. And what I just mean by that is, if they are angry towards you, if they are, kind of empathetic towards you, it's important for you to know that. And what might be going on with mirror systems is it's allowing us to better perceive other people's intentions, not just with regard to facial expressions, but with regard to their movements. If somebody is in fact, intending to hurt you through, some sort of physical interaction, right, then it's important for you to know that. So, that might be why our own muscle system is involved in perceiving the details of somebody else performing an action. It kind of allows us to perceive other people's intentions. A couple of other things I wanted to mention. I don't know where this literature currently lies. I can tell you about 5 years ago, it still seemed to be an important component. But it has been considered that that part of what's going on with autism and spectrum disorders in general, Asperger's and that sort of thing, might be related to issues in mirror neuron systems. Okay. This is not without controversy, and I think autism, if you know anything about autism or known somebody with autism, or Asperger's, that it can be a very, very complicated constellation of issues that are occurring. One of the things that has been explored is if, in fact, an autistic person has some sort of deviation, some sort of issue with their mirror neuron systems. Well, why would we think that? We do know that people with autism, especially severe autism, will have inhibited imitation. So they, in fact, show less contagious yawning. I didn't know that, but they will show less contagious yawning, and they won't do the kind of reflexive facial expressions that people that aren't on the spectrum will do. And so it could be that, yes, they do have issues. And in fact, a lot of researchers have explored this as a possible reason that autism has this problem. It's clearly not the entire basis of autism, but it might be involved. And they've done scanning, and they find that when an autistic individual looks at faces, looks at actions, videos of actions, as their brain is being scanned, they will show less mirror neuron system activation than folks that are not on the spectrum. Okay, so I'm going to be very kind of cautious here, and not try to claim that this is the answer to our questions about autism. I think it's, again, much more complicated, but there is some evidence that they show different sort of mirror neuron system involvement than people that don't have autism. On the other side of that is the idea of empathy. So, what causes our empathy? So, you know people that are more or less empathetic, kind of in a social way, but you may also know people that are very sensitive. They see somebody else get hurt, and they almost feel like they themselves are hurt. You see a child skin their knee, and you kind of almost feel a pain in your knee, that sort of thing, right? Is that related at all to mirror neuron systems? And there is some evidence that it might be. What you find is, at least in some studies, that if you ask people to come in and first do a rating of your own empathy, are you an empathetic person? Do you consider yourself a very empathetic person? And I think they also then validate it. They ask, your family and friends on a scale from 1 to 10, how empathetic is this person, that sort of thing. That turns out to correlate to some degree with mirror neuron system activity as a person is watching facial expressions, leg movements, arm movements, that sort of thing. The more empathetic a person rates themselves and other people rate them, the more mirror neuron system activity they will show as they're watching other people perform actions. Okay, let me take a quick little break here to see if there's any questions about this. Very often there are. It looks like there is a question. People are interested in how much this has to do with autism or how much this has to do with empathy. Okay, William's asking a great question about Serena's practice questions. She said that mirror neurons do not respond to imitation, but you're saying it is the most active during imitation. Yes. I will talk to Serena about that. Mirror neurons are active while we're imitating. In fact, that's where they are most active. Are you sure, William? She said that they don't respond during imitation. That's kind of odd. I believe she knows this from class. Well, maybe she miswrote or misunderstood something. You have okay, William has a screenshot of the question. Do you want to send it to me? Yes, okay. Well, if there's ever a discrepancy between what I say or anybody else in the world says, including Serena, I'm the one that's right. No. Let's go with what I say in this case. I'm not sure what Serena is referring to. I apologize. I will talk to her, and it could be that she's talking about something else and I'm misremembering. I don't want to, necessarily assume Serena's wrong and I'm right, but I will clear it up for you, and I will post something on iLearn about that discrepancy. Okay, thank you for pointing that out, William. I really appreciate that. What I'm saying is that, yes, mirror neuron systems tend to be, they're active when they're initiating a specific action, like reaching. They're active when watching somebody else reaching. And they're most active when both of us are reaching at the same time. In other words, I'm imitating somebody else reaching. I'm pretty sure that's correct, but I will check it out, ask Serena what she meant in the question, and then post it for you folks. Okay, any other questions about this right now while we have it? Cool. Well, you're doing such a great job today, being patient and asking questions and everything. I say it's time for a magic trick. And don't worry, it is a magic trick that is relevant to the class. So, ta-da, here we go. We got our magic props right here. I don't want to get tangled up in the wires or anything like that. Coolio. All right, so our magic props. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to pull it a little closer so you can see it better. Can you guys see this okay? All right. Our magic props are, what do we have here? Of course, we have the necessary magic wand. We have just one little red foam ball here, okay, just regular old foam ball. And we have a magic scarf, also red to match the foam ball. How fashionable. And then we have this kind of magic, whatchamacallit, I guess, we'll call it a magic box. And as you can see, there's nothing in it. Okay, so what we'll do is we're going to cover it's really hard to do this in such a small place, but I will do my best. We're going to cover the magic box like so. Let me do a better job of covering it here. All right, there we go. And we cover it. Good. Then what we're going to do is, here, let's do this. You know that magic wands do things like make things disappear and all that. So if I put this in my hand like this, okay, nothing's going to happen, right? It's just right there. But you know, if we do that again and use the magic wand, what's going to happen? Yeah, very cool. Now, where's the ball? I don't know. Maybe in the box. Ta-da! And there it is. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Why did I do that? Because I have a magic box and I need to use it. What I wanted to do is show you something that magicians do. I don't do it that well because I'm not a good magician, but let me show you how this works. What I did, obviously, on the second pass, you probably figured out what I did, is I didn't put it in the hand for real. I kept it in this hand, so like that. And I grabbed this, okay? And so it is, in fact, not in this hand, it's in this hand, right? You knew that, didn't you? All right, no problem. You're a lot smarter than most of the magic audiences. But it's like this, and like this. And look what I'm doing with my left hand. Again, this is not where the ball is. The ball's in this hand, right? What I'm doing with this hand is I am looking at it. I am kind of shifting my weight as if there is something in it. And that attention I'm paying to that hand will then, you know, kind of take your attention off of this hand. So it's there. Watch this. I'll do it again. Okay. And I'm looking at it like that. All right. And that attention of mine is something your brain imitates to make the trick effective. Okay. One more time. I'm looking at the hand. I'm now going to point at it with the wand and touch it. My weight is actually shifting a little bit. And I can do something with this, by the way. I ended up, I don't know if you noticed this, but I ended up dropping the ball behind the stand there while you were looking at this. So this is an example of imitation. And this is something magicians use to trick you. So let me go ahead and talk about that. Your brain is going to be set up so you imitate the eye gaze of other people. And you'll see, it's not necessarily your literal eye gaze that will shift. If it doesn't do that, your attention shifts at least. But in a lot of cases, your eyes will actually do this. It's kind of like, when you were a kid, did you ever play this game? We didn't have the internet, so we had to, think of our own games. That, on the playground, maybe you and your friends said, let's trick everybody and pretend we're looking at something. And you kind of look in the sky and maybe point up there. And all three, 4 of your friends do this. And then eventually people will come over and try to figure out what you're looking at, right? It's kind of like that, but it's in a more subtle context. And that's something magicians know your brain is kind of reflexively going to do. We are drawn to imitate somebody else's eye gaze. And I got a cute little example here with a better magician. It might be hard to tell because of the kind of delay and the little choppiness of the video. But let's take a look at him. Oh gosh, it says I can't play the media, but I tried it this morning. It should work. Let's do this. It's not much of a trick, but it's a trick that will then kind of unpack. Oh my gosh. Hold on. I swear this worked. Oh, wait. Let me try this. There he is. Okay, watch. Ah, he's not moving. Okay, give me one more second. This one was a little bit of a problem yesterday. Just give me a second. This is worth it, I promise, because it allows us to talk about the whole thing. Here he goes. Okay. Takes out a cigarette. Ta-da! Okay, so it ain't much of a trick, but it's going to be a very useful trick. And I should say, let's look at it one more time, maybe. Will allow me to do that. Okay, one more time. Watch closely if you can. Lights a cigarette. Okay, not much of a trick, but let's imagine this. Imagine it's seen on a big screen right there in front of you, and you don't know you're coming into an experiment to see a magic trick. Okay, what he's doing there is he's making, what did he make? He made the lighter vanish, he made the cigarette vanish by directing your attention away from the action he used to make it vanish. Okay, so let's see it one more time, and knowing that, see if we can see through it here. Oh my gosh, it's breaking my heart. Okay, he takes out the cigarette. He notices the cigarette is backwards in his mouth, and when he does that, when he turns it around, he drops the lighter. When he looks at his hand, other hand, he drops the cigarette. And what they did in this experiment is they actually tracked people's eyes as they were looking at the magic trick. It's a very simple thing to do. They can do it so cheaply now. You basically, you can actually use the camera in your computer, and you can use some software that will allow it to focus in on your eyes and where your eyes are looking on the screen. Okay, it's a relatively straightforward thing to do now. And what they were interested in is for people for which the trick worked, where were they looking at different parts of the trick? Okay, and this is showing the response down here. And I'm not going to go through this in detail, but this is what the observer is looking at. So you can see the observer is looking at the magician's face, and they're looking at their hand, and they're looking at the cigarette, and that sort of stuff. This is where the magician's looking at. Okay, where his gaze is going towards his empty hand, towards the cigarette he's turning around in his mouth, that sort of thing. And these are the actual actions of the magician himself. And what they found, if you look at the relationship between where the observer is looking and where the magician's looking, what they found was that, in effect, the observer's gaze, where the observer is looking, does follow the magician's gaze with about a half-second lag. So let me do it with my little magic trick. I look at my, let's see, how did this work? I put the ball here, and then I pretended to put the ball here. I looked at my hand. Then you either looked at it or attended to it at least. And while you were doing that, I opened my hand and then released the ball here. So I knew that was a good time to release the other ball from my other hand. Okay? So by kind of inferring, the magician inferring where you're looking at any given time, the magician is able to kind of misdirect you. And this is exactly what kind of visual misdirection is all about. Okay? They look one way, they do something secret here, and they're able to get away with it because they know, if not your actual eyes, your attention's going to go there. And you'll see what I mean by that in just a second. In this case, in the case with the actual tracking of the eyes here, it does seem that it does follow pretty clearly. Okay? All right, cool. Let's take our break there, and we will come back at 11:30. Great. See you in 10 minutes. Hi, everybody. Okay, William was generous enough to send me Serena's question, and I kind of figured out what was going on. So let me go ahead and let's see if I can actually show you her question. Can I do that? Yeah, good. This will work good. Hopefully, you guys can see that. There is Serena's question. So mirror neurons respond to or I guess triangle, whatever that is, a hand grasping toward an object. That is correct. B, a hand simply imitating this action. And I think what she means here is not imitating as much as miming. So imagine there's raisins there and I'm reaching towards them. That is in fact going to set off your mirror neurons. Okay. If, on the other hand, there are no raisins there and I just do this and don't grab anything, that will not, okay, as it turns out. You don't need to know. I don't really go through the subtleties of that difference, but I think that's what she means by simply imitating. You're watching somebody, pretend to grab raisins. Maybe she could have said a hand pretending this action or something like that, okay? So that's really what's going on. It's a long. There's a deeper story about when you can actually induce mirror neuron activity while you're watching somebody do something. It has to be towards some sort of goal. But if there's no raisins there and you're just pretending, you're miming, you're pretending to grab something and you don't, okay, that does not set them off. And I think that's what she means here. But just to kind of make it all clear, let's do the question from the exam that's going to be relevant to this. So here we go. We got a polling question right off the bat. Mirror neurons are known to be active when A, movements are initiated, one's own movements are initiated, 2, movements are perceived, 3, movements are imitated, or D, all of the above. And I think you know what the answer is based on what I just said. And here I mean imitation, the way that you would imitate somebody else doing something at the same time. How do we have here? Is that 4, 5, 6, 7, 8? All right. Let me give you another 15 seconds or so. Still some confusion, but we'll get it done. Okay. So the correct answer is, in fact, all of the above. So D is the correct answer. And this is all you're going to need to know about this miscommunication with me and Serena. This is the right answer. So when you get this question, D is the correct answer. If your own movements are, keep thinking about the monkey reaching. The mirror neuron goes off when the monkey is reaching for the raisins himself. The mirror neuron goes off when the monkey sees the student, the researcher grabbing for the raisins. So both A and B are absolutely correct. And if the monkey sees the researcher grabbing for the raisins and imitates him or herself, they're going to go off, and that's where you're going to see the greatest activity. So what I mean by imitation here is that the actor and the actor and the perceiver are going to be doing the same actions at the same time. They're both grabbing at raisins at the same time. That's what I mean by imitation. Okay, they're real raisins there. We're both grabbing for them. We're going back and forth like this, and boy, do those mirror neurons go crazy. That's where they really, really get active. Okay, so both A, B, C are all correct. The correct answer on this question would be D. That is what you're going to see. You're never going to see anything having to do with the way Serena asked it. I think she really meant not imitating, but pretending to do something. And that's something that goes beyond the lecture material, at least. This is the correct answer. D is the correct answer to this question. Okay. I'll probably post something on iLearn about this too. But, hopefully everyone should have no problem remembering this question when they see it on the exam. Are there any questions about this or anything else now? I want to make sure I answer any questions you might have, and I apologize for this. And I Serena made a very, simple little, it was more of a terminology thing. I mean, I think she just used the word differently than I used it. So don't yell at her. She did perfectly fine. All right. Anything else? Good. Let's continue. We got a lot of stuff to do. I'm just going to finish off our discussion of imitation with one more slide here. So I will stop sharing and share a different screen. Oh, here it is. Yeah. Okay. So actually, let me go back to where we were before. Just to quickly recap, we used magic to show that one of the things that does a lot of imitating is your eye gaze. You look to where other people look. And this is something magicians know. It's one of the reasons I interviewed the teacher at the Magic Castle, because I realized that a lot of misdirection has to do with trying to draw the audience's attention and eye gaze to wherever you want it to be, so other sneaky things can be done while they're looking where you want them to. And so I've got another example of that, and that will be it for imitation, and then we'll start talking about multisensory speech. Okay. Oops. All right. Yes. So I got just a very quick, another example of gaze misdirection. And what you're going to see here is just another really kind of simple magic trick. You have to kind of think of yourself in an experiment, seeing this trick, not knowing, first of all, you're in an experiment that has to do with magic. You're just sitting down, you're watching this video, and then you're going to be asked questions about it. So here we go. Now, I realize over Zoom it doesn't work great, so I'm going to show it to you again just so you get an idea of what this video is supposed to look like. Hopefully, you had some impression that the ball kind of vanishes, right? And so on the third throw, do I have my little rubber ball here? Yeah, on the third one. Oh, it's really hard. Okay, remember this? 1, 2, and on the third throw, okay, the ball disappears. And what's really happening, of course, is on the third throw, he's holding the ball in his hand. He's actually not throwing it up. But people are asked in this, they see it once and they say, oh, that was surprising. And they're asked where the ball went. And they'll say, I don't know, it disappeared. Maybe there was somebody above the screen on some sort of platform and they caught the ball, and that's why it didn't come down. I mean, they kind of were really fooled. A lot of people were very, very fooled when he did this. And so, again, it looked like this. Watch where I'm looking. 1, 2, and then 3 is the fake one. It would be in my hand. I lost my, here. It would be in my hand on that fake throw. But on that fake throw, I'm, following it up. And people would say, oh, it's being caught up there, right? Watch this other version of it now and see if you feel it's more or less an effective trick at the end. I know they're not great tricks, but here he goes again. 1, 2, 3. And I think most people would say, let me do it one more time, because I remember it's Zoom, so you might not get all the details if I don't show it again. 1, 2, 3. Okay. If you notice, there was a difference between that top video and the bottom video, in that the third fake throw on the top video, he kind of used his eyes to kind of mark where the ball should have gone. So he went up like this, 3, right? On the bottom version of it, he doesn't. He goes 1, 2, and then he goes like this. And he looks at his hand. Okay, and almost everybody who's in this experiment doesn't fall for the trick nearly as often if they're looking at the bottom version of the video than if they're looking at the top version of it. And again, here we have this idea of gaze misdirection. So they used this is kind of a little interesting twist. They used the exact same sort of method to track to see where the subjects were looking when he did this. And so this is actually showing you down here where the where the audience is looking as they do this. And see these little dots and X's here are telling you where the subjects are looking. As he's throwing this up, they follow the trajectory of the ball. And look on this third throw, and this is the one where he actually looks up. This is the top version of it. On the third throw, they start to go where the ball is, right? But then they stop. Their eyes don't get fooled completely. Their eyes kind of know that there's no ball there, and they'll kind of start looking for it down here. However, okay, even if that happens, okay, so the gaze of the magician is to look up. You don't necessarily literally follow the gaze. So this is an instance where, you start to follow the magician's gaze, right? But then your eyes don't get fooled. But what does get fooled is your attention. So even people on that third throw whose eyes didn't kind of continue to go up thought that there was somebody on top catching the ball. And what it suggests is that the magician doesn't necessarily have to literally redirect your eye gaze. They don't have to, wait for the audience to have everybody's eyes looking to the, fake ball that's in this hand, right? They just have to get the audience's attention to kind of follow that. So it's as if you're fooled, your attention is fooled, your understanding of the situation is fooled. Even when your eyes aren't fooled, your eyes don't follow that ball on the third trajectory because there is no ball. It starts to go up because they're assuming a ball's there, but then it quickly goes down and it says, hey, there's no ball there. And yeah, the magician is looking up there, but your eyes kind of, aren't tricked, but you are still, and your attention is tricked, and your understanding of what happened is tricked. So it doesn't always have to be the magician's gaze. So when I talk, for example, to the magic teacher at the Magic Castle, I said, when you do this kind of gate, you kind of do this visual misdirection thing, and you're looking over here at the hand you want them to look at. And you say, yeah, I'll look at it intently. I'll shift my weight so it seems like I have something in the hand. I'll point to it, all that sort of stuff. I say, well, then you wait for them all to look over. And he goes, no, absolutely not. I don't really care where their eyes are. I just know, regardless of whether their eyes are literally looking at their hand, at least their attention is there. They could continue to look straight towards me. Their eye gaze could be straight towards me. But when you look at something, you can attend to different things in your visual field, right? I'm looking straight at the camera now, but I notice that there's a iPad down here and there's a clock over there and all that sort of stuff, right? And so my attention can wander even if my eye gaze doesn't. Typically, our eye gaze will follow other people's eye gaze, but even if it doesn't, your attention does, and that's what the magician knows and makes use of. They take advantage of that fact. So out of all these things that we've been talking about with imitation, eye gaze is kind of one of the most interesting, and a lot of what a magician does is take advantage of your kind of attention necessarily following, imitating where his attention is going. Okay? Cool. Rather than stop here, I will just quickly shift our discussion to our next topic to make sure we can finish all this stuff. Hold on just a second. Oh, hold on. Oh, I guess I have to stop to do this? All right, fine. Yes, I do. All right, no problem. No one panic. No one panic. Yes. Good. All right. So let's share again. And we're changing our topic now to one of my favorite topics, one of the things that we've been studying in the lab for a very long time, and that is multisensory speech perception. And if you've read ahead in the book, you might know that the way this chapter starts out is by introducing you to a really pretty impressive woman. Her name is Sue Thomas. And she was, in fact, a professional lip reader for the FBI. And you should take a look at that part of the chapter. I'm not going to go into the details of her experience, but she was hired by the FBI actually to first do fingerprint analysis, and she found it excruciatingly boring. But they knew she was deaf, and what they kind of realized as they were working with her the first few weeks is that she was an outstanding lip reader. Completely deaf, but she had really learned to read lips in a very, very impressive way. And they decided then to take advantage of that and have her look at surveillance tapes where they suspected some type of crime was going on, but so they had images of people talking to each other, but they didn't have any soundtrack to it. So what they did is they brought her in, had her watch these videos and lip read what these people were saying to each other, and she was very successful at it. They actually then took her out into the field and would bring her to airports, lobbies, and have her look at suspects interacting on the other side of the lobby. So they couldn't be heard from where she was sitting, but because she could lip read them, she would be able to determine what they were saying to each other and whether that was, something the FBI should be on. And she did it for a number of years, and she was really good. In fact, they made a show based on her life. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it. It was called Sue Thomas FBI, and that is the actress who played Sue. That's Sue, and she actually is kind of an inspirational speaker now. There she is, kind of being funny, but that's Sue, and that's the actress that played Sue. And just as a quick aside, I had somebody in my class last quarter, in the same class last quarter, who was friends with the actress. And knew the show very well, and had actually had a chance to meet Sue. And I had a chance to meet Sue too, and we did our interview for about 2 hours or so, and she has no residual hearing whatsoever. I mean, she is completely deaf, but while we were talking, she was able to understand my questions through lip reading so well that I only had to repeat myself, I think, once, and she said it was because I was smiling too much. I was trying to be friendly, but she said when you smile like that, sometimes it is harder to read lips. But it was, I might as well have been talking to, and I didn't really even have to change my speech when I was talking to her. You remember I talked about changing my speech for Rick Joy, who had to touch my face for me to be understood. For Sue, I could just talk normal, and she was amazing. She was sitting very close and concentrating, but she really was able to understand me as well as if she were hearing me, which was just tremendous. Let me tell you a little bit about Sue. First of all, she lost her hearing at 18 months, and she already had some language. I can't remember why she went deaf. It says in the book, I don't know if it was some sort of virus or something like that, but she lost her hearing completely at 18 months. She already by then did have some language, but by 18 months you don't have a lot. You know what language is. You know that words stand for things. But it was before most of her language acquisition. She didn't have her full, anything close to her full vocabulary yet, and was kind of still struggling. When you're at that age, you're using sentences, but you're kind of 2-word sentences, that sort of thing, not a whole lot. But she was given intensive speech therapy because to her parents, they cared very much that she learned sign language, she knows sign language, but they cared very much that she be understood by people who didn't know sign language. So they wanted to make sure that her speech was clear to other people. And maybe you know this, when someone loses their hearing early, especially, sometimes their own speech is hard to understand because they don't have, the audible feedback of their own speech. So they do struggle with being understood sometimes. There's ways of kind of helping that, though, and they did that with Sue. This is how it's typically done if a child is deaf and they want the child to be able to speak and be understood by people, is that they will actually have them go through this intensive speech therapy. It can take anywhere from 5 to 10 years. For Sue, she went through it for 7 years as a little girl. And what a lot of it involved, and I think it still works like this, is producing speech in front of a mirror. So you want to make sure you're articulating things well. So when you make speech sounds, when you're producing speech, and you can't hear it, one of the ways to get the necessary feedback is to look in a mirror as you're trying to articulate. And typically what will happen is the child will be here trying to articulate into the mirror while the teacher's there also articulating, and they'll copy each other, all that sort of thing. And she did that not only with a teacher, her mother was very, very involved in practicing this at home all the time. And this is how she believes she became such a good lip reader. She said her mother's involvement in practicing this at home for hours at a time not only made her speech sound clear to other people, but it actually made her a better lip reader, because she would look at her own face, she would look at her mother's face as the speech was being articulated, so that she then was able to understand people by watching their faces articulate without any sound. And she said that her mother was always the person she could lip read the best. So if they were at parties together and they wanted to communicate across a room or something like that, when time to go home, mommy, that sort of stuff, her mom would just be able to articulate silently from across the room, and she'd be able to understand her perfectly. And then it kind of generalized other people. So when I interviewed her, she understood my speech perfectly. Her own speech is amazing. I mean, if there are videos of her giving these kind of inspirational talks, TED-type talks, and her own speech is very easy to hear, very easy to understand, probably better than many, many deaf individuals, because of all this effort that she put into it. She's also a very bright woman, a very accomplished woman, and the energy she put into kind of learning these skills probably really helped. But what's the case with deaf individuals? So as I talk about lip reading, you probably think, well, that's something that the deaf can do, they can learn to do, but not something I can do very easily. In fact, when I tell people that I study lip reading to some degree, I study how we use lip read information to help us understand auditory speech, all that sort of stuff. They say, oh, have you taken lessons in lip reading? And I say, no. And I know that there are such things. And I asked Sue about that. Had she ever, tried any of these lessons online, to become, to fine tune her lip reading skills? And she said, I've heard of these things, but I don't think they would work at all. And as far as we know, there really isn't a lot of good evidence that these online lip reading courses are any good. The truth is, it just takes practice and looking, at oneself or somebody else in a mirror, or just, across from them. And it's just really years and years and years of practice. It's not like something you can be taught. It is not like this. I have to make very clear when people ask me about it. It's not like learning to read. It's not like learning text. It's not like you can take an hour or a couple of hours of training or something like that. It's something, as we'll learn, that we actually all do a little of all the time. But to get to where Sue is, you got to do this intensive practice, something well beyond what the online courses will offer. It is the case, not surprisingly, based on what I just said, that the deaf are twice as good overall at lip reading than the hearing folks are. Typically in these sorts of experiments, both deaf and hearing individuals will look at a face articulating very simple sentences like the football game is over, the ball was on the table, the flowers were in the vase, very simple sentences. And what you find is hearing people get, I don't know, maybe one or two of those words in the sentence on average, where the deaf will get, many more of those words, just to give you some idea. It does seem to depend on having an early start with lip reading. So individuals who go deaf at a younger age are generally better at lip reading. And also, you find that individuals who want to use this as their primary means of communication will do better. And so there's some issues having to do with whether a deaf child should be given a cochlear implant, whether they should be taught to lip read, or whether they should just become part of the deaf community and be kind of and learn just sign language and not have to worry about necessarily interacting with the hearing community to some degree, that they should have a primary language and English would be their second language, all this sort of stuff. There's a lot of issues involved that I think one needs to be very sensitive to. But with Sue's case, her mom did know a little sign language, but Sue's mom really wanted her to be able to interact with hearing people. So, really did want her voice to sound clear, and as kind of as a byproduct of that, also Sue became a great lip reader. Other factors that come into play, what makes somebody a good lip reader, are things like gender. Women tend to be better than men. STM just stands for short-term memory span, and it's a very simple concept. It's just the idea of how many items can you remember at one time. So if you're asked to recall a series of numbers, what's the average collection of numbers that you can remember, and then regular reading speed, how quickly somebody reads text from a book or something like that. All these things are related to how well somebody can lip read. But for someone like Sue, it really, since it was her primary means of communication, she was just tremendous with it. Let me, before I talk then move the discussion to how we actually all use visual speech information, what I want to chat about a little bit is the neuroplasticity that occurs in the deaf. So we did talk about neuroplasticity in the blind, right? So the blind will use their visual cortex to kind of enhance their touch skills and to some degree enhance their hearing skills, like we saw with Daniel Kish. Something analogous does happen with the deaf. Okay, so there is neuroplasticity in deaf individuals, and that's especially true with individuals who've gone deaf at an early age. Okay, it does happen with people who lose their hearing at a later age to some degree, but like when we talked about the blind, there's more plasticity if one loses their sense at a younger age. Okay, so one thing that they is found is that they have greater kind of sensitivity, greater reactivity to visual motion in the periphery. And what do I mean by periphery? Okay, so when you sit here and look forward, you have a visual field. I said, like before, you can concentrate on different parts of it, even if you're just looking forward. This is the central part of the visual field. This is the periphery. And what you find with deaf individuals is that they are better at detecting when something is out here, like there's a little motion out here, or maybe something all of a sudden appears out here in the periphery, than people who are not deaf. Which is really interesting, because think about one of the purposes that hearing serves us. Hearing can act like a warning system for us, right? So, at any one time, we're just getting, a little less than 180 degrees of our space around us. We can't see what's behind us, right? But what we can do, for those of us that can hear, we can use hearing to determine if something is behind us just out of sight, right? The deaf don't have that ability. So what the visual system will do is compensate for not having that kind of warning system about what's behind you or what's out of sight by making the visual system a little bit better, especially with things that are on the side, that are just not quite in focus. So you do find that the visual system of a deaf person, especially an early deaf person, is a little bit better than an individual who's not deaf. And that's especially true here, where, since you can't hear things, you'd want to know that they were there. You can't hear things that might be just a little bit to the side or a little bit behind. You'd want to know they're there, which is a really interesting kind of compensation, I think. And is probably the auditory cortex that provides that benefit, right? So the auditory cortex isn't processing sound anymore, so it has its kind of processing skills to help the other senses. One thing it will do is help the visual sense be better at detecting things that are on the side. It also helps the visual sense respond to subtleties of motion like you might find in sign language. So when a deaf person is just looking at a general scene, not a lot's happening, it's mostly their visual brain that's going to be involved, like it would be with all of us. But when they start looking at like fast, subtle movements that you would normally see in sign language, their auditory cortex, which really had nothing to do now because there's no sound, the auditory cortex helps out the visual cortex to better see those fast, subtle movements. And it's not just true of of sign language. It then generalizes to other sorts of gestures, like things that are maybe related to sign language. So something like that, which I don't think is sign language. I'm just making these things up. Okay, you find that a deaf individual's auditory cortex will respond to that fast, subtle visual movement, even if it really isn't related to sign language, and it involves the hands and the arms. Okay, so you see kind of something analogous that we were talking about with regard to blind individuals. They will show this kind of cross-sensory plasticity and cross-sensory compensation to some degree, similar to what we saw with blind individuals. Okay. But here we go, on to the issue of the fact that we all lip read, and we've talked about that before in various contexts, I believe. Certainly in the very beginning of class when I introduced this topic, I had you go through the demonstration. But we know from research, not just my lab, a lot of other labs know from research, that whenever a healthy, normal hearing person is in a noisy environment, they will use the information they see from a face to kind of amplify the degraded auditory speech. That, if you're in a noisy restaurant, if you're at a party, at a sporting event or something like that, and there's a lot of background noise, looking at the face of the speaker helps you understand them better. And it's not just an issue of kind of concentrating on looking at them in the eyes, concentrating on their face in general. It's seeing their mouth. So if there's lots of experiments that have, shown faces while people were listening to noisy speech, and unless they're able to see the mouth move, they're not able to get a benefit from the face. It's the mouth movements that help, which is also true if you're speaking with somebody that has a heavy foreign accent. If you're able to see their mouth movements, you're better able to understand them. And then even if it's clear speech, you're not in a noisy environment, they don't have a heavy accent. If it's a complicated message, if somebody's trying to teach you something that has like a lot of new language and a lot of new words in it, like a biology class or something like that, where you're learning new terms for different parts of the cells or something like that, being able to see the face articulate helps you understand what the person is saying. So those have all been determined, not just from anecdotes and people saying that type of thing. I always look at the face when I'm in a noisy environment, but actually bringing people in the laboratory and establishing that is in fact true. It's also known to be true based on some interesting phenomena that has to do with language acquisition. So think about these individuals now. We just talked about deaf. Let's go back to blind just for a second. You'll see why this is interesting. It turns out like someone like Daniel Kish, someone, who else would we talk about that was born blind? Yeah, let's talk about Daniel Kish. He's probably the best example. That he lost his vision before he acquired most of his language, and his hearing is great. His hearing is probably, maybe even at that age, a tiny bit better. But what you find with these individuals who have healthy hearing but no sight is their language acquisition is a little bit delayed. Most interesting, though, is it's not delayed like universally. It's just certain speech sounds are delayed. For example, blind children take longer to be able to hear the difference between and n. So moon versus noon. Those are kind of very similar sounds. The first consonant of moon versus noon, right? Those are the sort of things you might have to spell to people over the telephone or something like that. Actually, acoustically, auditorily, those are very similar sounds. We can understand them, of course, when we're talking to somebody live, but or over a good connection, we don't, we can do it. But those are very close sounds, as it turns out. Blind children take longer than sighted children to be able to hear the difference between those things. Okay, be able to hear the difference between moon and noon. Why is that the case? Well, sighted children, we know, look at the face of speakers in order to better learn to hear differences in speech sounds. And even though moon and noon sound, they're acoustically very similar, look how different they are visually. Moon versus noon. And it says my internet connection's unstable. Hopefully it's okay. Moon versus noon look very different from each other. And sighted individuals, sighted kids are able to use that visual information to help them hear that difference, moon versus noon. Blind kids can't, and so they are a little delayed. But that delay during a language acquisition is just for things that are harder to hear but easy to see. They don't have access to that visual speech. So the idea is that certainly we're using visual speech all the time when we're learning languages. That includes our first language, and that includes your second language and your third language. If you're learning a new language right now in college, it helps to see the face of the speaker, without question. It helps you make these distinctions. And then finally, an example that we've discussed already, it shows that we lip read automatically. And here is the McGurk effect, which I talked about before, and I showed you this example where you're going to hear and see this person articulate syllables, and I think most of you showed that what you see affects what you hear. Ba. 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 Okay, I'll do it one more time, and what I suggest you do is you start looking and then you look away, and potentially you'll get the effect I'm talking about. Ba. 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 Yeah. Ba. So hopefully what happened is when you were looking, you heard ba, va, da, da, something like that. When you weren't looking, you noticed that really what was being presented to your ears was the same syllable again and again, ba, 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 I think in this case. Okay. This, by the way, I don't know if Serena showed it to you or you may have seen it before. This is a video that I am in that the BBC used on one of their science shows. And if you look up McGurk effect on YouTube, you'll see me completely embarrassing myself. Okay, I don't have time to show it right now, so which is fine with me, frankly. But it's gotten like 5 million views or something like that. Anyway, it's really embarrassing. So what's going on here is, what you're seeing is affecting what you believe you're hearing. And even though, as you know, you're not probably a very great lip reader, you're not able to turn off the sound of the TV and really understand very much. But boy, when you are able to understand certain syllables from lip reading, it's going to affect your brain well enough that you're going to believe you're hearing what you're actually seeing. Interestingly, this makes sense if you understand what goes on in the brain. And we talked about this before, about how the brain areas used to be thought of as really being very distinct according to the senses. So we had an area of the brain that was responsible for seeing and hearing and all that sort of stuff. Here is one of the first examples scientists showed, not my lab, other labs showed, where you can get the auditory brain area to change based on what somebody is seeing. So lip reading activates seeing a face and not hearing anything, in these original examples at least, actually induces activity in the parts of the brain that we used to think were just responsible for hearing. And it's interesting, after you see the McGurk effect, it really does seem like, what you're seeing, what you're being presented through your eyes is making you hear something different. And that makes sense now that we know that, your auditory brain is treating the face, the facial movements, as if you're actually hearing what that person is mouthing. Okay, so it's not that surprising now that you've seen the McGurk effect, you've experienced the McGurk effect. Your auditory brain, as far as it's concerned, what it's seeing should be sound, and that has that kind of effect on you. Pretty cool. Speech perception is clearly a multisensory function, and with regard to the McGurk effect, you find, and here's one of the kind of combinations of the McGurk effect. You find that ba plus ga will give you a perception of da. It works regardless of what language. Oh shoot! Wow. Hold on a second. Okay. Hopefully, is everybody, let me know if there's any problems. Chat, put something in chat if there's any problems. Hopefully this is working okay. Something just weird just happened on my computer, but I'm assuming everything's okay. Actually, you know what we're going to do? Let's take a break here. I meant to take a break and give you a question anyway, and I'll make sure everything's working fine. So let's just take a quick break here, and then we'll continue. First of all, are there any problems or questions with anything before we do our polling question? Any problems or questions? Is the video working okay? Just please answer yes or no in chat. Yeah, good. Thanks, Alex. Okay, he has a thumb up. Thanks, Joanna. Okay, so let's go ahead and do our polling question then. Yeah, good. This is on gaze and magic. And the question is, research on sleight of hand magic shows that A, even if your eyes don't follow the eye gaze of a magician, your attention does. B, even if your attention doesn't follow the eye gaze of a magician, your eyes do. Okay, read this carefully. C, both eye gaze and attention always follow the eye gaze of a magician. Or D, none of the above. And if you want to take a second and look back at the slide or something like that, go ahead. But read these carefully, please. All righty. Let's see. Do we answer 5, 5, 8, 9? Okay. That sounds great. Let's go ahead and end it. And the correct answer is, in fact, A. What the heck? Oh, I see. All right. So there's something, I don't know if I'm having trouble reading it because of the numbers that are involved. But research on sleight of hand magic does show that even if your eyes don't follow the eye gaze of the magician, your attention does. And that is correct. And the example you can think of is that, remember that the ball throwing experiment, on that final throw, even though your eye started going where the ball might be, it went down. Okay, it dropped very quickly, suggesting that, and the trick still works, however. So your attention, even though your eyes are looking forward, your attention kind of goes up. And that's what the magician knows. It doesn't make a difference. Remember it this way as well, that when I asked the magic teacher, do you care if everybody in the audience is looking where you're looking? Do you look at their eyes? And he said, no, it's not their eye gaze that's most important, because I know their attention is going there anyway. And that's exactly what the research shows. So the correct answer is A. B, even if your attention doesn't follow the eye gaze, your eyes do. No, it's your attention that's going to follow, not necessarily your eyes. And then, so that's also the case for C. It's not necessary that both eye gaze and attention follows the eye gaze of the magician. So it is the case that attention will always follow, eye gaze will most always follow, but not necessarily. Okay, so the correct answer for that is A. Take a quick snapshot of that, if you will, if you haven't yet, and let's continue. Okay, any questions now after that? Nope. All right, let's just go back and continue our discussion. And we're talking about the McGurk effect specifically. And what I've said is that the McGurk effect will work with all people from all languages, but the type of combinations that will work are going to depend on the language. So if you know that not all languages have all consonants in them or all vowels in them. If a language doesn't have a ga as part of the language, then it's not, the McGurk effect won't work for that. It will work for some other consonants that are in that native language, though. So regardless of, there will be some form of the McGurk effect in all languages that have ever been tested. We showed many years ago that it works with pre-linguistic infants. We were able to show that 4-month-old infants show something like a McGurk effect. And in order to do that, you can't ask them, of course, what they're perceiving. You have to kind of test boredom. You know, we didn't use we talked about this before. We didn't use a pacifier sucking sort of measure of boredom. We just did a test to see how long they would maintain their gaze towards the screen. And when they're, it turned out to be a very simple thing to do in infants. You know when they get bored because they'll look at the screen when they're interested, and when they get bored, they do this. Okay, they look completely away. And so we measure how quickly they get bored as we change the consonants and vowels of the McGurk effect. And we, without going into too much detail, we found that they probably show the McGurk effect as well. As it turns out, there's a lot of information available on a face. So we used to think that very little information could be perceived from a face. Like you could tell consonants and vowels and that sort of thing. But some consonants and vowels, not all of them. But as it turns out, all of this other information I've listed here, intonation, tone, pressure, accent, that can all be lip read as well. If in fact the tests are done in the right way. So what does that mean, intonation? For example, you can lip read whether someone is asking a question or making a statement given the same words. You're going to pick up your mom at the airport at 1, right? That's a statement. Or you're going to pick up your mom at the airport at 1? That's a question. And by watching a face, people can tell the difference between those two sentences. Maybe unsurprisingly, watch my face as I do it. You're going to pick up your mom at 1 o'clock at the airport. You're going to pick up your mom at 1 o'clock at the airport? There's a lot of information up here that gives away whether it's a question or a statement. So that can actually be lip read. What else? Tone. You might know that some languages, Mandarin, for example, use tones to distinguish different words. So I can't remember what this was. There's a combination of words, a mother and horse, I think, that are just really distinguished based on whether the tone goes up or down in nya, nya, like that. And that would typically be something that you would imagine be very hard to see on the lips, but there's enough information on the whole face that can be lip read too. And I should say all these things, when I say it can be lip read, it can be lip read by folks that don't have lip read training, right? Certainly people that have training are able to do this more readily, but people that have never really lip read for any intentional purpose before will come into the experiment and show that they can do this as well. What other sorts of things? Pressure, don't worry about pressure, but accent, so don't worry, you won't be asked about pressure on the test. But accent, if somebody has an accent, if you watch two people say the same sentence and one of them has an accent, one of them doesn't, what they'll do is they'll just show you the bottom half of the face to make sure there's nothing else there in the face that might give away the ethnicity or anything like that. You're able to tell whether somebody has an accent when they're saying, the same sentence as somebody who doesn't have an accent. It's something, and to some degree, you can even tell what general type of accent it is. So there's a lot more information on the face than we ever used to think there was. We know that whatever information there can also be integrated with what's being heard automatically. It really, really is. And here's a neat example of that. We did this experiment a long time ago. It actually has been done in different ways, but you're smart now, so as you look at that is a point light image. If I ask you what you think it might be of, you might be kind of clever because we're doing facial speech, we're doing visual speech, and you might be able to say that's a face probably. But imagine you come into this naive. Imagine you sit down and you have no idea what the experiment is about. In fact, we had to cover up the name of the lab because we didn't want them to know it was a speech experiment. They just sat down and we say, what is this? And they say, it's a dots that form kind of a butterfly image, maybe. Okay. Other people said maybe it was just like a constellation of stars or something like that. And then what we did is we let it move. Yeah, we let it move. So we showed it to them like this and asked them what they thought it was. And at that point, about a third of the people said, okay, I think it's a face. I think that kind of does look like a face now. But the rest of the people, again, would say things, your butterfly's flapping maybe, or, the constellation of stars is beginning to undulate a little bit. I know that the stars are moving relative to each other. There's a whole bunch of people that still weren't able to tell very much about what that was. And then what we did is we presented it, this image, this moving image, along with syllables. We said, we just told them that's all we were going to do. We were going to say, we're going to show you this image moving. And at the same time, you're going to be hearing syllables. And what we'd like you to do is just write down the syllables that you hear. So I'm going to turn on the sound now so we can do this with you. And I should say, this probably isn't going to work great with a lot of you, especially because of the Zoom synchrony issues. But it worked really well with our subjects. Let's see what you perceive. Which syllable do you perceive?
Ba.
Yeah.
Ba. 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 Ba.
You can close your eyes now to find out what it really is.
Ba.
Yeah.
Ba.
So what it really is an auditory ba. And what that face is doing, you know it's a face. What that face is actually doing is articulating va, like that, va, okay? So the question is, so it's a McGurk effect sort of situation. Will the visual face va influence the auditory ba? And I should say, it worked, it did. I mean, again, this wasn't done over Zoom, it was done on a big screen, people were in front of it. And about half the time, they said that it was a va they were hearing, even though it was actually a ba. So it's not as strong, actually, as the original McGurk effect with a real face there. But with this point light face, they get about 50%. And then what we did is we went back and asked them, okay, now do you know what this image is? And about 2/3 of people said, yeah, that's a face. I know what you did. You showed me a face, you played syllables, and I understand what you're doing here, okay? They wouldn't necessarily not fall for the McGurk effect, but they knew they were looking at a face. 1/3 of our subjects, though, never saw this as a face. They say, I don't know, I heard syllables, and I responded the way you told me to, but I still see a flapping butterfly, or I see, somebody dropped, ink on a white ink on a black piece of paper, and then they started jumping around a little bit. I don't know what that is. And what we were wondering is, even for the people that never recognized it as a face, did they show the McGurk effect? And in fact, they did. Okay? In other words, they didn't even know it was a face consciously, but the visual speech information that was in that image affected what they heard. It came in and affected their auditory brain, so it influenced what they heard. So you don't even need to be consciously aware of seeing a face in order for it to have an effect on what you're hearing. That's really kind of, I think, is a kind of good support that we integrate the information from different senses, and in some way your brain doesn't really even care if it's getting the information from hearing speech or seeing speech, to the point where it doesn't even need to know it's looking at a face, at least not consciously. Another thing that kind of comes in play, kind of supports this idea, is what we've talked about before, Tadoma. And you might remember when we were discussing Tadoma that someone like Rick Joy and Helen Keller, yes, they're amazing at this. They were able to do it wonderfully and make it their main means of understanding what people were saying. But even people that have never done it before, like most of us, if we sat down and felt a face articulating one thing, so for example, va, and you can feel that, as that's synchronized, that felt speech is synchronized with speech coming to your ears as ba, the McGurk effect will work. And this is kind of really kind of profound, because you're getting speech. By touching a face, you're getting speech in a way you've never gotten speech before, okay? Still, it integrates with what you're hearing. So your speech brain is using a new form of speech perception and automatically integrating it, automatically using it without any real training whatsoever. okay, which is pretty cool. And there's other examples of this too. You can, in fact, what I mean here by kinesthetic is you can induce a McGurk effect by either articulating something silently yourself, like while listening to Ba, kind of synchronizing that, or if you have your face moved by scary robot arms. I won't get into the details of this sort of thing. But this person, as they are listening to speech over headphones, is simultaneously having their face gently pulled in different directions. They're not moving it intentionally. And by moving their face in just the right way, it will affect what they're hearing. Kinesthetic, we might have used the term before, but if you don't remember from before, that's fine. It's just our sense of what's happening with our body at any one time. Remember, we discussed it when we were talking about touch and the wrist tendon muscle systems and all that stuff. This is an example where what we're doing with our body as we're articulating silently, va, va, or something else is doing to our body. These robot arms are changing our articulators. That will have an influence on what we're perceiving, what we're hearing. And so in all of these examples, we don't need to have kind of cross-sensory, cross-modal is another word for this, by the way, cross-modal or cross-sensory experience for the information to integrate. In the Tadoma effect, we've never touched a face before, and that information automatically integrates right away. Okay. In the scary robot experiment where this robot is controlling our face, we never have had that done before, but our auditory brain takes that in as information about what articulation is doing. And so I think one thing you can take from all this is that part of the brain, that part of our auditory brain that is responsible for speech doesn't care where it's getting its information. It just wants to know about what speech articulation is, what the person that's speaking is doing with their articulation, okay? Whether or not we can hear that speech, see that speech on their face if we're gonna use that lip read information, or even touch that face. The speech brain doesn't care about whether we're getting it through our eyes or our ears or our skin. It just wants to know about articulation and will take it any way it can get it and immediately integrate it with other information it's getting, which is kind of cool. Okay, let's shift quickly. We've got 20 minutes, all right. I don't think I need to take much time on this. Let me see what I've got here. Yeah, let me skip this next slide. I kind of hesitate to do it because it's fun. What this slide is about, I'll make sure there's no questions on your test based on this, but it goes through a really nice story about how voices match faces and how that plays a role in the way directors of animated movies pick voice actors for their characters. Okay, so I interviewed the director of this great old movie, Bolt. Maybe you've seen it when you were a kid, Bolt, remember that? Great old movie about a dog who's an actor who actually thinks he's the character in the movie, and he's a regular old dog. And what he has to go through to kind of come to terms with that. John Travolta's voice was used in Bolt. And I had a chance to chat with the director of Bolt, Chris Williams, and what he went through to choose John Travolta for Bolt, as well as all the other voice actors and what that involves. And the reason I talk about that example is that it's a really nice way to show that our brains are actually pretty sensitive to how voices and faces go together. And so I'm actually going to go on talk about now some of the science of that rather than talk about this example, but go ahead and look at it. Look at that in the book. I think you'll enjoy it. So we know how voices match faces. And whenever I give this talk, I always like to put a picture of Mike Tyson up because I think he's a great example of who we might think of when we think about examples where voices don't match faces, right? So, he's a tough looking guy, but he's kind of got this voice like this. I don't know if you've seen any of the Hangover movies. In those movies, he's a kind of imposing guy, but he's kind of got this voice that's kind of high. And I think that's part of his charm, to the degree he has charm. People kind of think he's got kind of this kind of cute voice. Don't tell him I said his voice was cute, by the way, if you're friends with him. Just don't even mention that. But he's kind of got a little mousy voice there. And we're very aware of that. But I think those examples are few and far between. The other person I think of, I don't know if you know who Fran Drescher is. She used to be in a show called The Nanny, and she's this beautiful, beautiful woman. And she's got a voice like this, kind of very nasally New York voice. It's a little abrasive. And again, that's a kind of part of her charm, I think, is that her voice and appearance don't go together well. And you might be able to think of other examples. Maybe you've noticed that you listen to a podcast or something like that for a while, then you finally see a picture of who the person is. And you say, oh, I did not imagine them to be like that. But for the most part, we are sensitive to the way voices and faces go together. In fact, if asked to match voices and faces, we do pretty well. And in these sort of experiments, typically what happens is, I got a little image that might help with this. Yeah. You hear a voice first, and then you see two faces articulating a speech. And one of those faces belongs to the person whose voice you heard. Now, I should say it's not as easy as just kind of trying to match up how quickly they're talking or something like that, because this works. People are better than chance at doing this across different utterances and speech material. In other words, utterance just means, say you hear the football game is over, you could then see the person articulate the football game is over from another recording that was made of that. That's what's meant by different utterances. Or it doesn't even have to be the same words. So you could hear somebody say, the football game is over, and then you see two faces silently articulating, the flowers are in the vase, okay? And even though they're saying different things, people can match which voice goes with which face. I mean, this is a situation where you're kind of given a two alternative choice here, so it's made easier for you, but you can do it. You can do it at better than chance levels. Also, it can be done even if you're listening to a language and then lip reading a language that you don't know. So, whatever language, maybe in a language from Africa or Asia or something like that you don't know, if you hear somebody say a sentence in that language and then see two faces silently articulating maybe another sentence in that same language, you'd be able to match the face to the voice. So we are good at this. I mean, we have a sense of how things go together when it comes to this sort of thing. Importantly, it seems to have to depend on not just seeing a picture of that person, like you're seeing the picture of Mike Tyson, or you might see the picture of the person whose podcast you've been listening to. You have to see the person talk. Again, it's silent lip reading sort of stuff. You're not asked to even, lip read the literal words. You're just asked to say which of these people it is. But you have to see the face moving to be able to make these matches, which is interesting. You know something about why someone's face might match their voice. Serena told you a little bit about that, right? For example, you know that attractive voices go with attractive faces. There's really kind of striking research that shows somebody whose face is rated as attractive is also going to have a voice that's rated as attractive. So is that what's going on here? Or maybe what you're doing is you're matching somebody's age or something like that. If you hear a kind of older voice, kind of older people have kind of a creaky voice like that, then you might match the older person out of these two or something like that. Or maybe the size, larger people, except for Mike Tyson, larger people tend to have lower voices, all that sort of thing. Is that how people are able to do it? And I'll tell you right now, the answer is no. Because it works with what we call isolated speech. It works in instances where we take away anything that you might be able to use on a face that could tell you about attractiveness or age or size. And we take away everything in a voice that might have to do with age, for example, or size. And we do that using kind of these weird techniques. Let's talk about the auditory technique first. How do you get rid of stuff the kind of the stuff in a voice that might give away age or size or attractiveness. And you do that through a method called sine wave speech. And don't worry about the technical aspects of this. But basically what you do is you just render the speech as whistles. And it sounds something, oh my gosh, is this not going to play? It sounds something like this. Let's hope it works. Oh my gosh. I swear I got this to work before. I apologize. It sounds something like, except it's 2, 3 whistles at the same time. But from that, that's how it sounds. From that, you can understand kind of what a person is saying. In addition, you can recognize who they are. The visual example of this is probably a little easier for me to show. This should work fine. What you do is you get rid of all the facial information and you just use point lights again. And here's what this would look like. You're going to hear a voice and you're going to see 2 point light faces. And the question is, which of these point light faces is of the person whose voice you just heard? And hopefully this will work. Okay, let's make sure the sound is up. Yeah. Oops, sorry.
The football game is over.
And now you're going to see 2 point light faces. Is it the first person or the second person? And if these were shown to you in the experiment, you would only see the points. You wouldn't see any shadows or anything like that. And it would look much smoother.
The football game is over.
And what I'll tell you is, in fact, yes, you can do this. You can say, I think in this case, it's the second of those articulating faces that matches the voice. In addition, we can now use that whistle voice. We can substitute in that whistle voice for that real voice, and people can make matches between the whistle voices and the point light faces, suggesting that it can't be the speaker's age that you're determining or the size or the attractiveness. There's nothing in the stimulus like that. What you're doing is you're using the person's style of articulation, what we call the idiosyncratic style of articulation. And the brain's able to use that to identify people. The brain's able to use how a person articulates their consonants and vowels together, how they string those things together in their own specific way to recognize who they are. And interestingly, that can come through either hearing somebody speak, as we showed in the sine wave speech with the whistles, that sort of thing, or it can be shown in the point light speech. So these matches that people are able to make in this way are based on how somebody articulates and how we're able to recognize who somebody is based on how they articulate. Okay? So the brain, what we're saying here is the brain detects articulatory style. Let me take a quick break here, see if there's any questions, then ask one last test question for you. Are there any questions? And then I'll try to finish quickly the rest of the lecture. Any questions on anything at this point? All right, let's do our polling question. And let's get a nice one for you here. Yeah, let's just do the McGurk effect one. Here we go. Okay, the McGurk effect, it's up there already, I guess. The McGurk effect is consistent with evidence that the brain responds as if it is hearing speech, works with pre-linguistic infants, works in all languages, or D, all the above. Great. Too darn easy. I got to make the tests harder next time, I think. You guys proved it to me because you're so smart and did so well in the midterm. I'm sure we'll do so well in the final that I got to make the test harder, especially if I'm going to give you the questions. Okay, let's stop there. I think pretty much everyone's answered. Yeah. Too easy. Yeah, too easy. The correct answer is D. Yes, the McGurk effect works. It sets off the brain Auditory brain is if it's hearing. Lip-read speech, it works with pre-linguistic infants. It works with 4-month-old infants. Pre-linguistic here, by the way, means that they haven't started talking themselves. Clearly, they're understanding a little speech, as this experiment showing, but I should have said that. It just means that they haven't started speaking words yet themselves. And it works in all languages. Again, the actual consonants that are used might differ between people depending on what their native language is, but some form of the McGurk effect will work. I'm going to give you another question because you're so nice. Okay, a very easy one. Good lip readers. Which of the following is instrumental in making someone a good lip reader? Being deaf, using lip reading as a primary means of communication, being female, all of the above. Go ahead and answer that one quickly. And then we will go on to the lecture. Glad I asked this one. Maybe it's a tiny bit trickier for people. Can you change your answers? Did we ever establish that? I guess not. All right, that's okay. All right. Want to hear something funny before I share this with you? The entire quarter, in fact, all of last quarter too, I kept on thinking there was always one person who was watching this lecture and not responding in the poll questions, because there's 10 participants and 9 people have responded. And I just now realized that the 10th person is me. Okay, let's share the results. This one, okay, so people did not get this one right. The correct answer, and make sure you get this down, the correct answer is D. And if you look back at the slide, you'll see that's the case. So yes, deaf people are twice as good at hearing people at lip reading. It's especially true if lip reading is the primary means of communication, which many of you did recognize. Being female, so gender does make a difference. And as I said, women are better generally lip readers than men. And so the correct answer here is all of the above, and make sure you mark that as the correct answer. So it's D, all of the above. All right, so what I'm going to do here is this will be the last time we're going to ask any polling questions, and I think I'm going to have to go to the very end of class today to get this last slide in. So let me see if there's any other questions about the exam, any other questions about the material today or anything like that, because I won't be coming back to that. No? Okay, let's just go ahead and do this very last slide then. And this last slide is something related to what we've been discussing just on that slide. All right. Here's something that we were really kind of surprised to find. This is something we found in our lab. To the degree that the senses work together for speech, regardless of one's lip reading skills, we're always integrating all this information. It's not just that the information is integrating, it's as if the information can share their own experience with each other. And this is what I mean by this. So you might not be surprised by this first statement, but actually until about 15 years ago, we didn't quite understand that it was the case. We hear speech better from talkers with whom we have some experience. So let's think about this. You're on your cell phone and the connection's not great. If you're talking to your mom versus talking to a stranger, somebody you've called at a store or something like that who you've never talked to before, unsurprisingly, you'd be better at understanding your mom than you would be your stranger. Now, that could be for a lot of reasons. One of the things is, of course, you're more familiar with the content of what you'll be talking about, of the nature of the conversation. But it turns out that that's even true at a very kind of superficial level, and even true when we're talking about very little experience. So an example of a classic experiment like this is that you're listening to a person's voice, and for say a half an hour, and you're just kind of trying to, maybe you have to push a button whenever you hear a word that has to do with sports. But you're listening to this person for a long time. That sports thing has nothing to do with the experiment. You think you're being trained with that specific voice. And then comes the second half of the experiment, where again, you're listening to a voice, but now the voice is in a background of noise, like that. Okay, so it's hard, and you're no longer asked just to press a button when you hear sports. You're asked to, actually try to transcribe things as much as you can. Pretty much everything they're saying, and they're saying sentences like, the ball is on the table, that sort of stuff. Okay, it's hard, but here's the deal: if you're presented in the second half with the same talker you just listened to for half an hour, you're going to do better than if you're presented with a new talker in the second half from the person you heard in the first half. Okay, even if you didn't know it's the same talker or a different talker, and even if the voices are pretty much the same when it's a different talker situation, you do better at understanding a voice if you have even a little bit of experience with that voice. Okay, so that's not maybe too surprising. What may be more surprising is this: that you also lip read better from a person that you're familiar with, even if you've never done real lip reading before. So we bring in our intro psychology students. They've never done any lip reading before, but we ask them to do their best. We ask them to try to get what words they can from these silly little sentences, right? And then what we do is we either show them the same person or a different person, and we just show the bottom of the face so they're not necessarily aware of that sort of thing. But what you find is that they also do better if they have some even kind of very temporary experience lip reading from one person. Again, these are people that are not good lip readers. They maybe get 1-2 words per sentence, but they'll do a little better if they're lip reading from the same talker they just had experience lip reading with. Okay, maybe that's not terribly surprising either, but I think this is what you're going to find surprising. It turns out that the experience one gets from either listening to somebody or lip reading somebody is actually experience that can be shared with the other sense. Here's what I mean by this. This experience can be shared. So imagine you're in this experiment now. You're asked to lip read somebody for half an hour, and it's you don't like this experiment because it's hard. Again, you're maybe getting 1-2 words, maybe 3 words correct in these sentences. You're trying your best. The experimenters are encouraging, so you have half an hour of doing it. And then what they do is they turn off the television monitor and they put headphones on you and they say, okay, now we're going to kind of test what you're doing with your hearing of speech. And you're going to hear sentences, completely new sentences now, but of the same type, in a background of noise like that, okay? And you're asked to decipher the sentences as best you can. And because it's noisy, you're not doing great. You're getting maybe 2 or 3 words. You're doing better than the lip reading. But here's the deal. If you're hearing this voice of the same speaker you just lip read from for 30 minutes, you'll do better, okay, than if you did not get the same speaker. So experience with lip reading a specific talker can then help you hear them better later on. Even though in these experiments, none of our subjects knew it was the same person that they lip read from and then heard the speech of. We asked them that and they said, no, I didn't even think about that. I just thought there was a lip reading test and then a hearing test. I had no idea whether they're the same or different person. But if it in fact is the same person that they just lip read from and now they're hearing that person's speech, they do better than if they are now hearing the speech of another person. And I should say these talkers weren't very, very different. Their voices were fairly similar, but it did make a difference. And we then tested it the other way. We had people listen to speech in a noisy background for a little while, and they got used to that speaker. And then we either showed them the face of a new speaker or the same speaker, and they lip read better from the person that they had just heard their speech from. So it's not just that the brain's integrating all this information from the various senses automatically. It's actually able to extract out information, probably having to do with that talker's specific type of articulation. And it's then going to share it with the other senses if that same person is presented again. So the brain cares now about speech articulation, like we've been saying, not modality. Cool. That ends our speech discussion. Let's just do one summary slide of the entire course. So let me just do this very quickly. Go back to here. Shoot. Just take a second. Yeah. So this is just a little review, just to finish up our discussion. And you have 1 minute, so I'll just do it very quickly. The whole course is about your hidden perceptual skills, right? You know that. And what we covered during our discussion of that were things like the fact that you're perceiving much more than you realize. Okay, your experience, your moment-to-moment experience is just a very small sliver of what your smell system is doing and what your taste system is doing, and your hearing and seeing things that you're often not consciously aware of, including the nature of the reflections in a room, and things like lip reading that you never knew you could do before this. Most of these things are unconscious, as we say, or subconscious. We call this implicit perception, that much of what these skills involve is not really taking up much of your conscious awareness. It's stuff that's kind of going on behind, but it's happening all the time. Interestingly, these skills can be enhanced, whether by virtue of talking about someone like Daniel Kish, who's learned to do it, or the wine expert that we talked about, Stephen Poe. With practice, they can be enhanced. Perceptual expertise is being. These perceptual expertise examples also demonstrate the plasticity that can go on with the brain. Many of these skills show that you can perceive properties of the world using senses that are not typically sensitive to these properties. So there's this kind of idea that the senses can kind of swap their typical function in some way to kind of help us with things, right? So you can hear space in a way. You can hear the outlaying of different surfaces of your room. You can see speech. You can recognize other people through touch and smell, things that we didn't typically think these senses were devoted to. Right? And it kind of demonstrates all this stuff, the multisensory primacy, the multimodal primacy of perception that, again, in some important ways, your brain doesn't care which sense it's using and can use the individual senses to get to the same information about a person's identity, a person's intent, the layout of a room through all these senses. You're particularly sensitive to human actions, as we said, and that has to do with imitation. That has to do with the mirror neuron system, and that's true of face and body movement, speech, all this sort of stuff, right? And so that's kind of a nice way of demonstrating that. So that's just a very quick summary of all the things that we've covered, kind of another way of thinking about some of these things, but hopefully it kind of organizes the course for you. Good luck. Enjoy the rest of your summer. Good luck on the exam. Let me know, or Serena know, if you have any questions, and take care. Introduce yourself next time we're both on campus. I look forward to meeting you. Take care.